Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar hosted by Eurocities and Julie's Bicycle through the ROC EU funded project. We are starting the webinar now, and for your information, it is being recorded. We will make the video recording available in the next couple of days, so you will be able to view it again on the ROC YouTube channel and share it on social media as well. Before we start with today's topic, some housekeeping information. I hope everybody is able to see my screen. So you see the introduction slide of this webinar today, which is called Culture-Led Regeneration, a Critical Look, with cities of Liverpool and Nantes presenting. Screen, yes, full screen, hop. Anyway, you can find several icons on your GoToWebinar panel. So there is a little hand on your panel. So if you could just click on it to just to make sure that everybody can hear me okay. And I see the hands raised, so this is fine. There is also a chat box. You can use this to flag any technical issues you're having during the webinar, and we will make sure somebody is here to answer you. You can also ask questions. This you can use to type your questions for the Q&A session that we will host at the end of the webinar. If you accidentally click the X in the dialog box, you will be taken out of the webinar, but this is not too bad because you can rejoin by following the link in the confirmation email you received. So everything seems to work fine. So just I will introduce a bit us and why we are here together this morning. As I told you already, this webinar is presented by Eurocities together with Julie's Bicycle. So Eurocities, it's the network of major European cities. We were founded in 1986 and we are based in Brussels. We represent more than 150 cities all over Europe, and our objective is to reinforce their important role that they play in the multi-level governance structure. So basically we focus on all things that are urban, and we try to raise the voices of cities at European level. Julie's Bicycle is a charity based in London, and they support the creative community to act on climate change and environmental sustainability. And together, Julie Bicycle and Eurocities, we are with other organizations, 32 in total. We are partners in the ROC project, which is financed by the Horizon 2020 research program of the European Union. And we put together this program of webinar to inform the general public, which is you, about the ROC project and the many different topics we are working on. And today's webinar is the third episode of a second season. We will certainly organize more in 2020, but you can also listen again or look at the previous webinars that are all available on the ROC YouTube channel. So some information about ROC. First, ROC. ROC stands for Regeneration and Optimization of Cultural Heritage in Creative and Knowledge Cities, as you can see on this slide. In this project, we are considering cultural heritage in a very wide definition as a tool for urban regeneration, and we are testing a circular model of transformation of historic city centers in 10 European cities, including the city of Liverpool, who participates in today's webinar. ROC aims to demonstrate how cultural and historical city centers can become laboratories to test new models of urban regeneration and therefore leading the urban transition. So ROC has developed this new approach which combines technical, organizational and social innovations to move from a linear to a circular urban regeneration model. And today we discuss how culture and cultural heritage have been used to foster urban regeneration with positive outcomes, of course, but also some side effects that were not necessarily expected. Before we dig into our case studies, I just want to explain a bit why we are talking about this today. So, of course, this is not a new topic, and there has been a lot of publications and studies and projects done on culture as a tool for urban regeneration. Even the ROC project itself is about this topic. So we all have examples of cities that have used culture as a tool to revitalize their city center, their waterfront in the case of Liverpool also, or their former industrial areas, usually after a crisis or sometimes even as a bet on the future. But today's conversation, we wanted to focus a bit more about the impacts that have been measured after years of policy implementation and how these cultural-driven policies have changed dynamics in neighborhood or changed the international image of the cities, but also which were the impacts at local level. So for instance, questions like, did it change the image of the cities, the image that the cities have of themselves? How did it benefit inhabitants, or how does it benefit them still today? Did it improve their confidence or their pride of the city? Did it change neighborhoods' daily lives and dynamics? So you see, these kind of questions. It will be also interesting for us today to understand the strategies that have been put in place by cities to mitigate the negative impacts that sometimes happen when you do cultural-driven policies. And our two invited cities certainly have things to say about this, but it would be also nice to hear from people in the audience. So maybe you have good stories and you can also ask, put them in the question box that you are seeing on your GoToWebinar panel. One last objective of this webinar is also to find out more about how cities are integrating the notion of sustainable city planning into their cultural policies, their strategies and their projects. So more about that will be in the last part of the webinar, so stay with us until then. So now, without further ado, and now that we have some context about the purpose of today's discussion, we will dig into concrete cases. So our first example takes us to Liverpool in the UK. Liverpool is a great example of a city which has transformed its former industrial heartland into a contemporary hub of culture and business. De-industrialisation that began during the 1970s is the main factor that has led to the decline of city centres area. Of the city centre area of Liverpool, and during the early 80s, a sharp decline of the industrial economy especially affected the city and led the docklands and waterfront to dereliction. Liverpool at the time experienced a very high unemployment rate in the UK, and people were leaving the city each year. Large portions of the land were also left to dereliction. But in 2004, large portions of Liverpool waterfront and the city centre became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and this has sparked a lot of changes, enhancing the city's competitiveness and global image. And now the Docklands became the face of tourism campaigns for a revitalized city. Then in 2008, the city was awarded the title of European Capital of Culture, which led to massive investment in the culture sectors and events. And still today, the national and international reputation of the cities continues to be influenced by this title. So to better understand the impact of the year, Liverpool City Council commissioned a study called Impacts 08. Maybe you probably heard about it because it's quite a famous study. And it was a joint research initiative to evaluate the social, cultural, and economic and environmental effects of Liverpool's title. And Dr. Beatriz Garcia, who has directed the Impacts 08 study and has since worked a lot on cultural impact and legacy of mega events like the European Capital of Culture title. She's here with us today, and I will let her present you the study, the main conclusions, and what she thinks maybe should be the main lesson for Liverpool, but also for other cities when dealing with cultural-driven regeneration policies. So I will now make Beatriz a presenter so she can do her presentation. Yeah, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cecile, and good morning, everyone. I'm trying to see whether you see this as a full screen. I think it's just getting there.
Not a full
it is
screen
a pleasure.
yet.
Not it's thinking, isn't it? Yeah. So let's see if we get there. Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you all, and thank you very much for this contextualization out of what was the story of Liverpool and the build-up to its European Capital of Culture year in 2008. The case of Liverpool is, remains a fascinating case study, because also it's the kind of city that it's not simply an industrial past. It was a city of trade. So it's not a city of factories, but of warehouses. And as such, the kinds of a skill base of a city like this were even more fluid. No, it was about the people that go in and out of ships and engage in the change of produce rather than the production of things, as was the case of Manchester. But let me tell you about the study that we did. And let's see if we can. My computer seems to have frozen on this, so I'm not sure if I can move in between slides. What I want to share with you is the findings of the work that we conducted on the city over 5 years. So from the moment that Liverpool was awarded the European Capital of Culture title until a year after. And then I would like to share as well a few reflections on what has been happening in the 10 years later. But I'm not sure whether the images are going to show. Just a moment ago, this was working, but yeah, for some reason, I don't seem to be able to go beyond my front slide. So I will keep speaking, and if at some point I'm able to show you more images, then I will link with the presentation. But for now, maybe I talk to you even if you cannot really see my slides. I wanted to start by telling you about the importance of the research program we put together. Because when we are discussing the topics and the purpose of the project that Cecile has been sharing with us, one important element is how far cities are ready to go in documenting processes of regeneration. How seriously can they take the importance of good quality research that is of a longitudinal nature? So that you can really compare the before, the during and after of an intervention. And how ready are cities, and local authorities and universities to engage in a discussion on both the positive and the negative impacts. So Liverpool was quite brave because partly building on the experience of Glasgow that had been European City of Culture in 1990, they took very seriously the possibility of providing an evidence base for whatever might happen as a result of hosting this title. So it was possible to start on the work that I directed almost just a year after the city got its award in 2003. So from 2004 to 2005, we were ready to set up a team of research and were able to convince our funders that it was important not only to monitor and assess the economic impact that tends to be what dominates discussion around the value or the success of cultural regeneration, but to do so in parallel with a thorough assessment of the cultural, the social, the environmental, and especially the image or the symbolic impact of the intervention. So we put together this framework of research covering 5 thematic areas. And it was quite a large endeavor involving over 25 different projects. All of this is published online in the impacts08.net website, and everything is freely available. Now, we presented the work and we organized our findings per theme. And starting on the economic conversation, and really how frustrating it is that you cannot really see the images. One of the big findings was the really remarkable impact that hosting this title had on tourism volume and spend in this city. It is something that actually would not be very easy to replicate in just any other city. And it was very important to understand the particular conditions of a place like Liverpool, because it was and is one of the cities that is recognized internationally. It has those very strong associations, on the one hand, obviously, with the football clubs, but also the Beatles, its waterfront. So it's the kind of city that in Japan, in South America, I mean, anywhere around Europe, you have heard of this city. At the same time, in the 80s and 90s, it didn't really have a tourism base. Visitors would just go in passing, maybe see quickly a few of the sites around the waterfront. It is completely true that getting the World Heritage Site denomination and the efforts that were made to, well, refurbish and to bring more to life and showcase the beauty of the very dramatic architecture in the waterfront help with attracting visitors and so on, but the point of departure was pretty low. So obviously what we have is an example of a city that has this kind of dramatic growth that can be associated to an intervention. Obviously, places where the tourism base is a bit more developed might not be able to prove those changes in as extreme an extent. So in here, we were able to prove that there was around 34% growth in visitors in the city from the year before in 2007 up until the end of 2008, and that there was around 754 million pounds of direct spend on the city and the region that was in some way motivated or inspired by the fact that the city had hosted this title. So these are very dramatic, very large figures that at times might be seen as a kind of point of reference, but it's a bit dangerous to see them as the only way of proving success. I think other smaller, more subtle statistics could also be an indication of success for cities that come with a very different framework. In France, obviously, you have also the example of Lille and how things had happened in 2004. That also had a very interesting success story associated. But the case of Marseille in 2013, we are observing and just trying to see how much things might be similar to the phenomenal evidence we were able to gather for Liverpool. What is interesting is then what happens 10 years on. And what we have been able to see is especially that the tourism impact, so the impact of this denomination on the volume and both in terms of numbers of visitors and of expenditure of tourists has continued to rise far above the averages in the rest of the country. However, any claims that had to do with an impact on job creation or the capacity to raise the education and attainment levels or reducing unemployment in the city, this is not something that it has been possible to prove to the same extent. In fact, this city continues to underperform on that front. So it's really quite interesting to see, well, how far can we go with certain claims around what an event or a cultural regeneration of this nature can do and what it cannot do. If we move into the social impacts and what we define in particular as access and participation impacts, what we also have is quite extraordinary immediate effects out of hosting the title. Something that was very noticeable in a place like Liverpool is that the trust in the capacity to deliver and to do something successful before the year was very low. There was not much confidence in Liverpool, and a lot of the local population had an skepticism on whether this kind of event could do anything but be a way of attracting the external eye or do a nice party for visitors. They were doubtful that this kind of initiative could really have an impact on neighborhoods and in a place with such levels of economic and social deprivation. So the expectations were low, and a lot of opinion on the city, especially during the year before, so from 2006, 2007, were quite mixed. The city had been very, very happy to get the title in 2003. It was an unexpected win. Really, there was not much high belief that the judges would award the title to a city like Liverpool. But that euphoria went down, especially once London got the Olympic Games, which had been awarded in 2005 in order to be hosted in 2012. And all the attention and all the celebrations at the national level were focused on London. So Liverpool had a tough ride between 2005 and 2007, and the local population were uncertain on whether this kind of event would expose yet once more the deficiencies or the problems and the challenges that that city faced. But actually what happened was the opposite. A mixture, especially the very sensitive approach that the organizers took to what we could call the kind of grassroots approach to programming. And in this case, what was called the Creative Communities Program, which was very extensive and was very strongly grounded on neighborhoods and dealing with many topics, not just the arts, but sport, heritage, education, all kinds of issues that had to do with youth and the ongoing challenges in a city, from alcohol to violence. I mean, all of these topics were very much at the heart of this community program. Actually, this managed to connect with people that ultimately felt welcome and reflected in the program. So our assessment revealed that there was very kind of widespread range and part of the population involved in the event and attending initiatives. I mean, over 60% of the population would claim, and in response to surveys, that they had attended at least one event. The volunteering program was very successful. There were over 4,000 people that registered and 1,000 that were active during the year. And what was very important is that it was possible to connect with the different ethnic communities in the city. A city that is a port city had very old, well-established groups from Chinese to Afro-Caribbean, but often had not really put them into the core or made them protagonists of high-profile events. So in this case, it was possible to engage many of those communities, and this was seen as quite an achievement. So yes, from an access and participation point of view, the feeling also by the end of the year was one of, we have done well. And actually, this has not only been about bringing Paul McCartney to sing in Anfield Stadium, which of course is an iconic event and would play very well with international media, but it has also been about going to the different neighborhoods. 10 years on, what we have observed is very interesting how memory evolves, how people look back at what has been defining for them. So what we see is that, in fact, the kinds of opinion polls on the population that were still quite mixed up until late 2007 and in early 2008, as time goes by, what they show is a more and more of an assertion of people feeling really proud that their city hosted this event, that it was seen as successful externally, and that in some way it told a story that was valuable to them and that didn't exclude their own voices. What the people keep saying, however, is that the city is still very challenging from an economic point of view. And the big question marks now, after the global crisis, is, again, whether you see that there is a capacity to retain more young people and to see it as a place not just to have fun briefly or to come and study, but a place to stay. We had a couple of interesting, valuable quotes from individuals we have spoken to in 2018. And I will just read you one line before I move into the next theme. I mean, what they would say is things like, you should not underestimate what people got from this European capital of culture personally. She said, I got my city, I am a Liverpool girl, but I did not have the awareness, for want of a better word, that the Tate, for instance, one of the big galleries, Tate Liverpool, in the city belongs to me, that the galleries belong to me, that amazing art belongs to me. So this event, the European Capital of Culture, was powerful, and it made me love my city again. So these kinds of quotes have emerged. We have done a lot of focus groups, and it's quite powerful from a kind of emotional, subjective point of view. What we are not able to prove, however, is that this event has had a clear, explicit impact on, for instance, audience levels to cultural organizations or attendance at events. There are a series of indicators that have been very much at the forefront of claims around the value of cultural regeneration. And for instance, the expectation that if you host an event such as this, you might make people want to go to concerts more often or to museums and galleries more often, to pay to go for it. This is something that is not that easy to prove, at least just with the established statistics. So from a kind of social engagement, local involvement point of view, a lot of our evidence and what we can show is a strong legacy of these kinds of events is more in the sense of interest on the symbolic, on the valuing of what you have, of feeling proud of your city as a cultural center, but it might not translate in a very straightforward manner on how often you might want to go to a museum or to a gallery. So the big question that we keep having is, what are the kinds of cultural engagement or approaches to cultural life that make sense to assess together if we want to see, well, to what extent these kinds of initiatives change the way communities engage. I mean, maybe it's not about looking into how often you go to a museum, but it's how you speak about your city and how you understand culture if someone asks you about it. And certainly on that front, we have very, very different results if we compare what we heard in 2007 from what we hear today. I'm wondering about timings and how I'm doing, so I want to wrap up within the next few minutes, but I wanted to share with you as well some of our findings regarding what we call the theme on cultural vibrancy and sustainability. This was the work that we did on how this kind of event impacts on the artistic community, on creative industries for a city, whether it's possible to show that the benefits of the initiative might go beyond the large institutions and be spread throughout other types of activity. And what we were able to prove as an immediate impact is that this kind of initiative can have a very beneficial effect on the capacity for the cultural sector to organize itself, to develop networks that then can sustain over time, to feel more empowered, to develop a language or a way of operating that makes them more capable of communicating with their funders, with the local authorities, with the media, with other sectors. So that was something, again, very evident in the case of Liverpool, that had quite a dysfunctional approach to its cultural policy developments before the European Capital of Culture, and after that created a series of networks that survive to this day, both a united front for all the large cultural organizations and also a group that encompasses all the small and medium art organizations. Their chief executives, representatives from their education and the marketing teams now meet on a regular basis every couple of weeks, and that can make a big difference into, you know, the capacity for those organizations to have a voice and to be noticed within the city. A lot. So this has survived over time, and we have also seen, well, a growth in what you would say like capacity to develop initiatives that can self-fund or operate in a way that is less reliant on public funding. So very interesting, the effect that having got a big budget for 1 year and giving someone the chance to test something with ambition, what this can do for those types of organizations to learn, to be a bit more, to be more ambitious in the long run. So yeah, if I could show you images, I would be able to share with you some of the visualizations we have made around the development of grassroots culture in Liverpool. The one area, however, that 10 years on, we cannot really see as having changed that much compared with other parts of the UK is the classic definition of creative industries and the kind of more business or especially more commercially oriented types of activities. So again, we have always to be very careful in understanding what it is that an event might change and sustain over time, or what it is that really requires a concerted effort that really has more to do with long-term and widely developed cultural strategies for a city. I would like to wrap up with a few reflections. And I'm hoping that you're able to follow up, just listening to my voice and not having a kind of visual prompt for my presentation, is on both what we could consider the strengths and the possibilities, but also the ongoing challenges in the case of Liverpool. In terms of the possibilities and the strengths, and there is a slide I could share with you afterwards, what is clear is that this type of initiative in Liverpool was able to reach out and be socially inclusive. So that was done, and it has had very positive impacts in the levels of self-confidence for the city, and for different neighborhoods to feel that they are part of a place that now is not seen as a basket case, as we say in the UK. You know, that is not just a loser or a city that is not able to deliver when it's put under pressure. The image has gone through a whole renaissance. Liverpool is not just associated with the Beatles of football. There is a very credible narrative about it being a center for contemporary culture, for advanced artistic interventions that are impressive on a national and international level. And there has been this impact in terms of economic change, especially for its capacity to attract tourism in really impressive ways. However, things that have not really changed sufficiently and that remain a question mark is the capacity for the city to be as strategic as it should. A lot of what happened was the result of really the city coming together, making a big effort, taking 2008 very seriously, and then surprising everyone when expectations actually had become very low. But on the strategic level, the city still lacks a sufficiently transversal and sophisticated approach to managing its cultural assets. So I will put here as a close, and to provoke a bit of a conversation and discussion later, one of the wins and awards for the city that was in fact instrumental, I believe, in winning the European Capital of Culture title was securing this World Heritage Site title in 2004. Well, by 2019, this award is in an endangered list, and it has been so since 2012, 2013, and it is unclear whether this city is going to be able to retain this title or whether it's taking sufficiently seriously the warnings from UNESCO. So a very, very interesting conversation has ensued within Liverpool about what have been the learnings out of the European Capital of Culture title, the value of taking your cultural assets seriously, and whether this translates into valuing the heritage and the kinds of expectations that come with having a World Heritage Site title. So the city is engaging in a debate around whether there is a contradiction between heritage and development, how to avoid becoming just a chocolate box, not just a frozen city with beautiful buildings, but without the capacity to attract investment and keep growing as an urban center. Whether the problem is in UNESCO and there are some outmoded ways of developing heritage, or whether there is also part of a problem on a city that still needs to become more sophisticated in its strategic ambitions and more demanding with its investors, and not taking for granted that just because you have a few beautiful buildings and you're able to put a great party out there, that this will survive over time. So I think I will leave it there. I am very sorry that you have not been able to see any images, but I will leave also the slides with you, and maybe a bit later we can get you to access this material. So I think for now, I will put this presentation to a close. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Beatrice. And yes, we will be able to share the slides later so participants can receive them, no problems. And actually, it's very interesting what you said in the last part of your presentation about the ongoing challenges for Liverpool, because last June, we organized a study visit as part of the ROC project in Liverpool. And it was on the topic of regeneration of cities through smart investments in cultural heritage, including sustainable business model for cultural heritage. And one of the highlights was about the governance of cultural heritage in Liverpool. And we discussed the fact that the city has adopted a holistic approach to redevelopment with multidisciplinary teams working on the projects and initiatives. And the main lesson of that was the partnerships between the public and the private sectors. They were saying that these partnerships are necessary to enhance the economic and social prosperity of the city and not create upscale exclusive quarters. But from what I understand in your presentation is that actually these partnerships did not really work properly, at least in the case of the World Heritage Site, which is the waterfront regeneration program as well. And maybe the public sector was not strong enough to preserve this sense of place and identity, and make sure that the regeneration of the World Heritage Site was also for the people of Liverpool. Because now it's true, it feels, when you go there, it feels more as more like a touristic area and less than a neighborhood for the people. So I don't know if you had a comment on that, or it goes with what you said, this contradiction between cultural heritage and real estate development, basically.
Yes, so it's an ongoing conversation. I think part of the issue is that, because the main challenge for Liverpool is the issue around governance. I mean, in terms of the creativity is there is a very rich mosaic and fabric of artistic, an arts population. It's a city that has been fantastic, again, in engaging its communities. And as I said, so those things have been achieved. But from a governance point of view, there is a sense of fear, and at times a kind of, like, almost a very simplistic understanding of issues, to the point that there has been a fear of using the word heritage as if it was a contradiction to the term creativity. So obviously the sector is now well organized. There are these networks I mentioned. And in that sense, there are possibilities for the conversation to evolve. There is a much better basis to have the public and the private sectors and the non-profit sector to talk to each other, but it's not completely resolved. So it's not out of the question that the city might lose its World Heritage Site. And the big point of debate right now is what power do the universities and obviously the cultural organizations that believe that this would be a major loss have to ensure that the local authority doesn't feel that this is something worth losing for the sake of attracting more investment. No, the big conversation is, can a city like Liverpool feel confident enough in its assets and its value to be much more demanding with the commercial developers? Or is this something that poor cities like Liverpool, that yes, are developing their tourism economy, but are struggling on any other area of the economy, are they still very fragile and feeling that no, they have to say yes? And if there is investment from China, or there is, a big opportunity, you cannot really let it go.
It's hard to resist also the temptation for that, especially after going through a crisis, I guess. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, and please, if you can, stay with us, because I'm sure participants will have some questions at the end. And about this, just a small reminder for all the attendees, you can already type your questions in the question box, and we will take them after the end of the presentation. So maybe we can move on to the second presentation, which will probably give even more food for thought about the topic. So we will go to Nantes in France. Nantes is the 6th largest French metropolitan area and a very dynamic city. At the moment, it has the highest job creation rate of all metropolitan areas in France, and its unemployment rate is 2 points lower than national average. Nantes is also a youth-friendly city, and Nantes was awarded European Green Capital in 2013, and is considered to be the greenest major city in France. And this year, Nantes is also iCapital, so European Innovation Capital. But before all this title and recognition, the city came quite a long way. Nantes was also deeply affected by industrial crisis in the 80s, which left millions of square meters of abandoned industrial area, especially the former shipyards. But since the early 90s, local policymakers have been pioneers in using culture and later the creative industries as a driver for territorial change and growth, international attractiveness, social inclusion, innovation and creativity. So as such, cultural and creative industries played a key role in the regeneration of the island of Nantes, which is the former industrial area of the city center. I will let the colleagues from Nantes who represent the city, but also the Samoa, which is the local agency responsible for the regeneration of the island of Nantes. They will explain to you how they actually did this in the past years and what are the future prospects for the island of Nantes, knowing that also new challenges have arisen. So I will make Marijke presenter now so she can show you the presentation and hopefully it will work. Otherwise, I will go back to my own screen and I also have their presentation. So I think it works, Marijke. We can see your screen and unmute it, so you should be able to speak.
Let me
Perfect.
see if we can put this in. Oh, great.
Yes,
But
that works perfectly.
can
So
you
I
see
will,
the,
yes,
you
we
can
can.
see the dialog box? Oh,
No, we just see your full screen, the
great.
presentation.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're
Floor is
going to do this with my colleague Lucy. So I will start and Lucy will take over in the middle of our presentation. So the idea is to see how, as an urban developer, we have integrated culture in the urban, or how culture has been integrated in the urban regeneration of the island of Nantes and the role it has played and still plays. But why can I not go to my, yes, there we go. So just a little bit of context. The metropolitan area of Nantes is located in the west of France. It's about 45 minutes from the ocean. It's a city, the city itself is about 300 inhabitants, the metropolitan area about 640,000. It's a fast growing city, so the projections are that by 2030 there will be 100,000 more inhabitants in the metropolitan area, which of course means that we have to accommodate for these new inhabitants. The island of Nantes, which, as you can see from the map, presents a very strategic piece of land in the metropolitan area. It's really the center. It's 337 hectares big. It's about 5 kilometers long, 1 kilometer wide. In 2015, the island represented 6% of the inhabitants of Nantes, so that's about 18,000. And about 20,000 jobs were accounted for on the island. So it's not just a place where people live, it's also a place where people work, which is very important also when we start speaking of culture. So I'm having a hard time going to the next slides. Here we go. Just to show you a little bit where we're coming from. So in the 1950s and 1960s, there's a blooming industry on the island of Nantes. It covers about a third of the island in terms of surface. It's mainly the naval shipyards. You can see on the photos a little bit the structure of, the industrial structure on the island. But in addition to the naval shipyards, there's also a very large food industry on the island and fertilizer industries. So the island was mostly known for its industrial industrial work, so hard work and hard labor on the island. And that's really what the image of the island at the time was. People went onto the island to work. And part of the island wasn't even accessible to the inhabitants of Nantes because you needed your little pass, your factory pass, to be able to access it. So that's a very important point when we compare a little bit the impact of the urban regeneration on the image of the city. Beatrice also talked a lot about this, but that's a very important point for Nantes as well. So very large, you can see here an aerial photo of the 1960s where half of the island isn't even constructed yet and the other third is just all industries. One of the specificities of the city of Nantes is that in comparison to other French cities, there's very little I guess, monumental historic heritage. So the word cultural heritage in Nantes has a specific meaning, I guess, when you think about other heritage sites, such as a UNESCO heritage site in Liverpool, but also if we take the example of Bordeaux, who has a very large historical, UNESCO city center. Nantes doesn't have that. And Nantes has always kind of looked at itself as we don't have much attractiveness in our city because we don't have any historical heritage. And the project, not only, but the urban regeneration of the island is going to contribute to changing that image a lot. So in the 1970s and the 1980s, we enter a period of decline. The photos that you see on the screen here actually date from 2005. So that period of decline and inactivity goes on for quite a long time. But at the end of the 80s, the industries leave the island, and that kind of marks the beginning of a new period. The next 10 years will be used to start to think a little bit about what are we going to do with the island in terms of redevelopment. In 2000, the beginning of the 2000s are an important moment for us, I guess. The first architect and urbanist is going to start, or urban planner is going to start working on the island and starts to redefine the priorities and the master plan of the urban planning. In 2003, the Samoa is created, so we are the urban development agency responsible for the urban development of the island of Nantes and only the island of Nantes. We don't work on other sectors of Nantes. And we are responsible for all the building of public space, the rehabilitation of certain public or buildings with a public interest. You will see an example a bit later on. And we also are responsible for things like depollution of soils, because obviously there's big problems of pollution on the island, which is important when you think about public space. So we start working in 2003. And one of the first rehabilitations on the island is really in the center of what used to be the naval shipyard activity, where a big park is created and the waterfront, you can see it on the photo on the top left, the waterfront is rehabilitated in an arts, leisure, and cultural park. So in a period of almost 10 years, the photos I showed you just a little bit earlier, 2005. So we really say that as of 2005, 2007, the first major changes become visible and livable on the island. The image of the island is going to undergo a drastic change. So instead of it representing this piece of the city where people went to work and did hard labor, it has become a piece of the city where people go to live, also still go to work, but mostly and most important on that part of the island, where people go for a leisurely walk on Sunday, where you can go get grab a cup of coffee or a drink at the end of the day while enjoying the sun, which is very present in Nantes. So when it's there, you really want to enjoy it, and it's a great place to do that. So the way people are using the island has changed a lot. The arrival of culture, arts, and leisure in all of that, it's often arises the question, but why at some point, does culture and arts and leisure, how does that come about? I always talk about several major factors. It's not just one event or one decision or one person or political person that is involved. It's really a combination that makes it a very fertile ground or ecosystem that kind of emerges. So in the 90s, with all the empty buildings on the island, and you can see it a little bit on the photo, especially on the bottom right, all of these big empty spaces were available on the island. So there's kind of an underground, not movement, but presence on the island where artists and creatives start to occupy these buildings. And while they work there and create there, they also open these spaces to the public. It's not a closed universe or ecosystem. In the middle, you can see Les Allumés. Les Allumés was a festival that took place every 2 years for about 12 years. There was 6 editions. And it took place in an old warehouse on the island of Nantes and became very well known and very representative of this kind of underground atmosphere and spaces on the island. In the 90s also arrives Royal de Luxe, and the interesting thing is you can see one of the big giants walking around on the top right. You also saw a big giant on the picture of Liverpool that Cécile showed in her slide on Liverpool. So these have become very, I guess, present in the public space, and their workspace was partly on the island of Nantes. So also very connected to the island of Nantes. Those were kind of the artistic and the creative presence on the island. At the same time, it's also a matter of people. There were several kind of visionary people that started thinking about how can culture help to regenerate this city, which is Nantes was long time called La Belle Endormie, as other French cities of the same size, but several people had played a major role because they had very I guess strategic visions, or maybe they were able to project into the future what culture could do for the city. One of them was the mayor of Nantes, Jean-Marc Ayrault, who was a mayor of Nantes from 1989 until 2012. So the continuity of his presence has also been very important. We can also talk about Jean Blaise. Jean Blaise was behind the festival Les Allumés, but he has his presence in Nantes and his visions of culture for Nantes have played a very big role. And I think that there was then a conversation between the urban planner Shemitov and the director at the time of the Samoa with these visionary people to see how that could be implemented into an urban redevelopment project. And then another factor that also played into this were several European projects. We were lead partner in a European project in the early 2000s, which was called ECCE, ECCE, and which thought about how to support economic development of the creative and cultural industries. So it's really several factors that have played into this, and something that's also very important to keep in mind is that this didn't happen in 3-4 years. So the first elements of culture and the presence of culture on the island date from the 90s. So this is something that Nantes has been working on and thinking about for the last 20-25 years. And I always think that that's important to keep in mind. It's not, the impact of culture and how does culture contribute to urban regeneration doesn't just happen in a few years. It's a long-term process, or it has been for Nantes. So when the Samoa started working on the urban regeneration and thinking about how can we integrate this into an urban plan, the idea, one of the ideas that emerges is the creative districts. And so in 2007, and Lucy will speak a little bit more about it in the next slides, but as of 2007, the official decision is made to implement a creative district on the island of Nantes. But the first parts of this implementation has started a bit earlier, since the architectural school arrives on the island of Nantes in the 2000s, early 2000s, I believe, 2005, and it's really the first element of the creative and cultural industries. The idea is to unite as many elements and organizations and actors and institutions of culture and creative industries on those 15 hectares of the island. So it's a mixture of higher education and research, which means education, the architectural school, the design school, the fine arts school. There's motion design school, etc., etc. There's a part of a lot of space that is made available for the startups and companies and small companies and artists that work in the creative and cultural industries, and Lucy will talk a bit more about that. And then the last part is all the different elements that are related to arts and leisure. So there's exhibit spaces, there's concert spaces or halls, there's the big park of the Chantier, you can walk along the river. So all of it, this kind of emerges as a concentration in the high density of the creative and the cultural sectors. Cécile, can you unmute Lucy, please?
No. Am I speaking?
No.
Does that work?
Cécile? Cécile?
Yes, I'll try, but unmute.
You can mute me if you
I
want.
can mute you and unmute Lucy. Normally, I can only mute her. I don't know why. Should work.
All right, I think I
Yes.
can you hear me? Right.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so based on this creative district map, I'm going to go just a bit back in time in the origins of this creative district. So of course you've seen that there were heavy political policy about cultural policy and public investment in public equipment, and now I'm going to go a bit to the development also on not only cultural activities, but the cultural and creative industries that are now become quite central in our work and in the island of Nantes. And so the Alstom warehouses is actually where it all started for the Samoa. So it's an old Alstom factory. The Alstom company left this building in the early 2000s, and the Samoa actually settled in this in the Alstom warehouses in 2003. And so to share this very large space, they invited a lot of artists and collectives and cultural or creative entrepreneurs to actually settle in the area, in the building, and to accommodate them and share the maintenance costs. There were light refurbishments that were developed in the Alstom warehouses to house these entrepreneurs and artists. And between 2003 and 2010, actually around 50 artists or collectives were housed in these Alstom warehouses, and actually helped demonstrate the power of and the need actually to develop these activities for an economic also perspective. Because these entrepreneurs also developed events and started, helped the people of Nantes go back to the island as well, because it was quite abandoned, this area, and so it helped really, let's say, so that the people could know the island again and come back to these industrial areas. And so this is actually demonstrated in important activities that we do now today to support the development of cultural and creative industries on the island is temporary use, because we now have developed a strong practice of rehabilitating likely buildings that are abandoned and then using them temporarily before a permanent plan is developed to house and to welcome cultural or creative activities. And so once the Alstom warehouses found a definitive or permanent plan, we tried to develop other sites, and a good example of the first good example of this is the karting. So the karting is a let's say is a kart racing, old buildings that you can see in the top left, and that was lightly refurbished. So as you can see in the bottom picture, with wooden boxes that serve as office space, and to welcome the cultural and creative entrepreneurs for lower rents than the market price. And so that's how we're able to really support the development of the cultural and creative industries on the island, and the young entrepreneurs, the young startups that need to be accommodated for lower prices than they can find in the rest of Nantes or in the center of Nantes. And so that is working with a larger picture to really be able to attract, develop these activities, but also keep them on the island. And so we have now 11 sites that we run such as the karting, to really welcome these entrepreneurs, the young entrepreneurs. And we have developed a whole circle of real estate development for them, because as soon as they grow and start to develop, we're also developing now permanent real estate designed for and tailor-made for the cultural and creative entrepreneurs. And so this was all in demonstrating that creative district was a very important tool for economic development. And so the Samoa now, since 2011, has another branch of activity. We are the urban developer, but we're also an economic development agency concentrated on the cultural and creative industries. And so we are now going back full circle to where it all started for this cluster, and going back to the Alstom warehouses and the development plan now. So this is the permanent plan, and so it is quite the embodiment of how we consider the development of the cultural and creative industry. So you have here the mix of higher education and research. The yellow one will be the fine art school that is already developed. The red one is also a higher education and research. There's a university department for the digital humanities. And so we're also versed a lot on digital areas. And so in the green ones will be small enterprises in the digital areas. And we will have in the blue-green parts the development, the economic development support team. And so this is very important in how we sustain and how we develop the cultural and creative industries on the island and keep them there. So another image of how it will look like and how it kind of already does. And so we are trying to focus and encourage the mix between these different groups, so students, so professionals, young professionals, and so be able to provide them with mixed spaces where they can meet and work together. And so this is very much the core, the heart of the creative district, and it's a very large metropolitan equipment, which is also representative of the strong political focus that is put on the creative industries today. Now that we have seen how it was kind of a success story, this creative district, we are even now talking about a creative island, trying to enlarge this creative district to the Turtle Island. We're going to see how, in terms of urban development, it has also a lot of challenges have emerged, because so it is quite a successful story, but it has brought a lot of attractivity to the city as well. So not only the island, but the island, the redevelopment project is a large part of this attractivity. And so now Nantes is one of the most attractive city in France, and it grows at the rate of about 8,000 new inhabitants per year. And actually 1 out of 2 people that are settling in Nantes will first settle on the island. So we have a very big challenge of accommodating and housing all these people in Nantes, while of course preserving or controlling, preventing a massive urban sprawl. And so this has led to changing a bit in the model of the urban development project, because at first, when the urban project started in the 2000s, there were there are 12,000 people on the island, and the objective was to reach about 15,000 inhabitants on the island for the same amount of workers. So it was so it was the objectives, and now actually the project has quite densified these numbers, because we're trying to reach actually double. We have doubled the objectives, and we intend to reach 30,000 people at the end of the project on the island. And so this brings also the questions, the attractivity brings the question also of the gentrification that is naturally going on with it. And so, of course, the prices in Nantes as a whole have risen quite dramatically in the past few years. And on the island, and mainly the western part of the island, which is let's say the newest part, because there were no housing, and there was no housing there. And so we're trying to maintain the high level of social diversity that exists on the island, because historically the island has a lower average revenue rate than the rest of the city. There are quite a mixed population here, and we're trying to maintain this and have a special focus on not be open to gentrification that much. And so we develop a few tools for this, and also we develop a lot of social housing on the island and the new operations. So every new building operations actually contain, on average, 25% of social housing, 25% of affordable housing, and the rest of free market price housing. And this also is linked to, we have a strong focus on the communities, with the fragile communities on the island. We have there are a lot of students actually on the island. We've seen in the creative district there are a lot of universities or higher education and research schools, and so we have a lot of students that live on the island and that need to have these prices maintained and need to have also accommodation that are designed for them. So we are developing also student residences and student areas, and trying to maintain them on the island. But also when I mentioned fragile communities, I also meant precarious people in precarious situations, and we're trying to keep them on the island and see how they can be integrated in the city. And we're developing also several building operations that can include them, or that will help with their inclusion in the city. And so there are other challenges we have as an urban developer, linked to culture as well, but we have, let's say, developed a manifesto, actually a sustainable manifesto, that will guide us through all of our developments in the future. And so this manifesto is, as you can see on the screen, is articulated around 4 main guidelines that we are deriving we're deriving them into every public spaces operations, public spaces development, but also private building developments. And so they are articulated around, let's say, the health and well-being. That is our angle now, our main angle, is to be able to accommodate all the new people, but also the people that actually are on the island as of now, and to develop and maintain this health and well-being pathway in the city. And it goes through it goes through all of our operations. And so we are putting the citizen at the heart of this, because we have been developing for a few years now a lot of citizen participation practices, workshops where they are included in the making of the city, and how to gather their needs, and also how to make them participate actively, like in developments itself. And this manifesto can be, let's say, can be presented with a very specific example that I can show you on the next slide, which is a future park that will be developed. So this is the western point of the island. It is actually the most, let's say, expensive part of the island, because we have a great view on the river, you have a great view in the setting sun, and so it could have been, large housing sold for quite a ridiculous amount of money. But in fact, it will not be. It will be a park, a large park with no cars. And so we're trying to, well, we will be developing all that we have shown you for this presentation in this park. So you will have cultural activities and nature in the city that are a strong focus. You'll have citizen participation, because a lot of citizens will actually be included in, are included in the making of this park. And we will also be using temporary use to reactivate this zone, because now it's a, let's say, big parking lot, a big parking space with just one road that goes through there. And so to reactivate and make people want to come back to the site, we are developing cultural activities, and we'll be developing cultural temporary use, let's say. Cultural activities that will be there on a temporary basis, that also will gather the people there. And so we have started with this, and so we have implemented an urban farm that is also developing cultural and educational activities and events. And so this is part of the bigger plan to include also cultural activities and environmental activities. So this is a good example. Maybe I'll wrap up now. A bit of a conclusion. Maybe Maaike, you would like to conclude on
Thank you, Lucy and Maaike. I think we have 15 minutes left together, and there is one short presentation from Lucy from Julie's Bicycle, and already I see some questions from participants. So maybe we can you can keep the last comments for the question parts. But thank you very much, because the last bit of your presentation is a perfect link to actually what Lucy wanted to say. Because what we have seen so far from the different cases so of Liverpool and Nantes is that culture is mostly seen as a mean to support an urban vision that is intelligent, city-centered, and socially just. But now we are also asking the question of knowing the time we are living and the new challenges we are facing is in how can this vision also be environmentally sustainable. And to this leads to our third presentation from Lucy from Julie's Bicycles. She will explain a bit more the role of culture in sustainable city planning and how can culture policies contribute to more just, sustainable and healthy cities. We know that several initiatives have been recently launched, including European funded projects, and Lucy will give more details about what in particular. So I would just unmute her. And Lucy, do you want me to share my screen now? Is it better?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will just make myself a presenter.
Great. And I'll just ask you per each slide.
Full screen. So does it work? Oh, this presenter view again. Okay.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Lucy Latham. I'm the Policy and Cities Programme Lead at Julie's Bicycle. And my work really focuses on the role of culture in driving urban transformation, convening cultural and environmental stakeholders in cities, and supporting cultural policy and practice, which is aligned to climate change policy frameworks like the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm going to just run through some slides, and we're going to be relatively quick because we don't have much time left. And perhaps we'll do a follow-on webinar, which is more concentrated on issues. So next slide, please, Cecile. So there are, there we go. So there are two things we do know here. That culture and creativity are these key drivers in animated conversation on climate change and socio-environmental issues. And culture is an enabler of people-centered societies. And that's something that's really critical within this. But in a mutually supportive way, socially and environmentally engaged cultural practice ensures course, culture's relevance in contemporary society, as well as ensuring inclusion and access, or rather supporting inclusion and access, and leading to more resilient cultural infrastructure. Can you hear me okay? Can I just check whether you can hear me okay?
Now it's better, yes. But there was
Okay.
some, you sounded very far, yeah.
Okay, I'll speak louder. So next slide, please.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so there are some challenges, though, to contend with as these issues relate to urban development. So if you're using, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals framework, there's a lot of dialogue at the moment whether or not the SDGs are locking us into an economic model that is unsustainable in itself, that prioritizes metrics like GDP over things that actually make life worth living, human prosperity, the protection of our natural environment, the life support system that sustains humanity. And furthermore, this framework, the SDG framework, when in use, can sometimes obscure the prominence of Goal 13, climate action, which really should underpin interventions and actions across the entire SDG goals. And although the United Nations includes this in the kind of rhetoric, when you see people use the SDG framework in practice, there can be a tendency to miss out on Goal 13. Of course, there are also issues when urban renewal projects, including investment in green infrastructure and investment in cultural infrastructure, result in gentrification. And that's why this is a really good segue from our last presentation. And it has been discussed for a number of decades now what the role of the arts is in gentrification. I'm not going to go into that particularly now, but this is something to consider when investing in cultural infrastructure: is who are those jobs going to, who benefits, who's hence excluded from those spaces, and what those broader socio-economic and political consequences are. Next slide, please. So this is just to say now that to really inspire people to save, to be environmentally conscious and climate change conscious, there has to be a social justice element. If transition is not socio-ecological, it will mean nothing, and we are already seeing protest movements that are responding to this, a good example being the Gilets jaunes. So since inequality destroys this sense of collectivism, like we're all in it together, the climate fight has to confront this and actually be a transformation that is socio-economic at its core. And this really means validating kind of culture creating activities that care for the common good and care for people-centered regeneration and undermine this primacy of 20th century models of economic production, extraction and commodification. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of projects which I'll just highlight that I think are starting to really engage with this conversation. First of all, a fantastic project in Barcelona that I really encourage you to have a look at. It has some fantastic research that's being produced that really builds on urban planning, policy, social inequality and development studies, with an emphasis on the kind of opportunities and challenges that are created by these municipal, community and private initiatives aimed at sustainability, equity and health. Next slide, please. and Urban A, which actually Cecile and I are both going to be contributing to, which is another Horizon 2020 project. And this project will be reflecting on the urban knowledge that research projects have already identified, and looking for what those actionable approaches are in the creation of sustainable, inclusive and thriving cities that form really deep understanding of democracy and citizen empowerment. And then next slide, please. And finally, a very quick flag about one of the Julie's Bicycle projects. Another podcast program called The Colour Green, and it's Colour Green is conversations with people of colour about their relationship with the natural environment. And this is a really great episode about a community land trust based in South London called Russ. And its mission is creating sustainable neighbourhoods and genuinely affordable homes. So I really encourage you to look at that, or listen rather to that episode. And thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Lucy. Is there another slide? No. Questions? Yes. That was quick but very interesting. Thank you for keeping your presentation shorter than what we planned originally, but we had 2 great presentations before, so that was worth it. Thank you to the amazing speakers, actually, for the great presentations. We have only 10 minutes left, so I've seen that there is some questions in the question box, so I will maybe take one for Liverpool and one for Nantes, so we have equal sharing of the questions. So I see that there is a question for Beatrice. First question, are there any publications available on the results you've presented today? And I think there is, because the study has been published as a document in itself. And the second question is a bit more difficult maybe. How would you define culture in urban regeneration? Is it the sum of cultural elements like architecture, art, sports, etc.? Or is it more than that? Voila, that's from Anastasia. Beatrice, would you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you. And the answer to the first question is yes. So everything is published in the impacts08.net website. There are both summaries and then more detailed reports on all the areas that I have discussed. And if you look at beatricegarcia.net, there is additional material that we are going to be publishing soon on some of the updated reflections, especially in terms of comparison with other cities, other European capitals of culture. Regarding, yes, how to define culture in urban environments, it's certainly always much more than the sum of their parts. I mean, we have gone through an amazing journey over the last 30 years in developing the narrative of what it means to talk about cultural regeneration or urban regeneration with a cultural dimension. So the discussion is far more enriching today than it was when it started in the late 80s. But what is clear is that it never goes on a straight line, and that in order to engage stakeholders, sometimes we have to simplify the conversation and go back into this list of sectors that need to relate to each other and just talk about, yes, who is working in the arts, who is working in heritage, who is working on sport, how this links to transport, how this links, to public space, and how it all combines together. I have written a little on the notion of the cultural system of cities. And what I have tried to do with that is to visualize the different areas that policymakers recognize or have codified in some way to make the point that they are all interrelated and explain what the culture of cities is. But of course, if you talk to anthropologists or if you talk to other groups or artists, then the conversation can be taken in another direction that is much, much richer. So the conversation about what culture is in cities keeps being relevant. We have not resolved it in full. We have urban policies that are much more integrated and transversal today than was the case 3 decades ago, but it has not happened in the same way in every country. So at times I need to be talking about the different sectors and presenting this as a sum of areas. If I am in an audience that is a bit more advanced on these understandings, then we can push for a far more ambitious notion. But so we have not completely resolved it because we still have cities that develop strategies that are not very sustainable. And so for as long as we have the risk of the economic driven, investor driven approaches to regeneration, we will have to be making arguments about what culture is that might have to engage with simplistic notions. But yeah, my answer is certainly much more than the sum of different sectors, and it's a conversation worth to keep contributing to from as many angles as we can.
Yes, from my side, I can also add that we have seen it in the case of Nantes, that it's also important when cultural policies are not really positioned as sectorial, but rather transversal or horizontal policies. So I know that in the case of Nantes, culture is really connected to economic development because of all the creative industries and also the city attractiveness, to also urban regeneration, as we have seen with the example of the island, and also social cohesion. So I guess this is the important aspect to take into account, that culture is connected to other things. But thank you. I hope this answered what Beatrice said, answered Anastasia's question. And there is an extra question, and then we can close this webinar. One question for Marijke and Lucy. How were the creative industries attracted to Nantes? Did you develop any economic incentives? And what kind, if there was any? So I don't know if Marijke or Lucy, one of you can answer the question. I will unmute you now. Or doesn't work?
Yep. We had a certain presence of the creative and cultural industries in Nantes, but I think it was in the beginning quite limited. Royal de Luxe was attracted to the island in a very direct manner, in a sense. They were looking for a space to work. They didn't have any workspace anymore. And so the cultural maire adjoint, vice mayor at the time, proposed and suggested they come to the island of Nantes to work. So there it's kind of been a bit of both, in the sense that with some political intervention, there's been a major, Royal de Luxe is a major cultural actor that have been attracted to the island. Because the image was changing, there's also been a spontaneous arrival of creatives onto the island. We don't have any incentives in terms of taxes or reduction on local taxes or things like that. But what we do have in terms of an incentive is the real estate offer that we have for the creatives, because the rental price for a square meter on the island in the office spaces that we as an urban planner are able to offer are below market price. So it depends a little bit on the type of space that the organizations rent, but for a classic office space, it's 150 square meters for 1 year. 150 euros per square meters for 1 year, where the market price is more around 200. So that's, I guess, the most in terms of a financial push that we can give to attract the creatives onto the island. I hope that answers your question.
I hope that too. We have a couple of other questions, but I think we are running out of time and I don't want to keep you too long, but we will make sure if you provide your email addresses and if you really want to have answers from our speakers, as Nadia did, I see, we will make sure that the speakers receive your questions and are able to answer to you directly. That might be easier. But again, thank you very, very much for having attended this webinar. Hosted again by Eurostes and Julie's Bicycle, as I said in the beginning. So we will announce soon the next webinars, but to be kept informed and receive all the news from the ROC project, you can also subscribe to the ROC newsletters or visit our website, which is www.rocproject.eu. And I wanted to thank our speakers, of course, but also the attendees for having stayed with us all this time. And I wish you all a good weekend. It's Friday. And yeah, rest of the day. So thank you very much. We will close the webinar now, and we will also try to follow up by email to some of you that have sent their email address. Thank you again, and we speak soon. Bye.